Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. We have an incredible group of speakers today that I'm excited to introduce to you. But first, I want to introduce you again to our topic of walking the ESG talk. So as you already know, ESG is a huge opportunity for firms and clients and employees, all stakeholders are really having this expectation that you are going to walk that talk. And the question is, are you prepared for that challenge? So the conversation today is going to focus on that alignment of commitments and actions, and are you embodying what you say? So think of greenwashing. If you think of the report today that came out from the Law Students for Climate Accountability, you can also think about the cognitive dissonance I've been mentioning. And the idea of, are you being accountable to your commitments? So, but beyond that, there's more. Do you understand what your stakeholders are expecting and how they're gaining an understanding about your firm? And are you able to understand your ESG program in terms of its data and its structure? And are you able to use it to drive impact and business opportunity? So that's what we're going to talk about today with our guests. But before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about format. So we're going to take a little bit more of a conversational approach with with Natalie and Adrian, and feel free to post questions or contribute any comments in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer some of those questions as we go along. But we'll try to save about 10 minutes for some Q&A. So with that, I want to introduce Adrian. He is the CEO of impactvise, and he spent 20 years as in-house counsel, general counsel, and company secretary to a major global insurance company. And since 2021, he is the co-founder and CEO of impactvise, so a data analytics company with a mission to help law firms in driving sustainability and a positive impact on society. And then we have Natalie. Natalie has 20 years of experience working for multinational organizations, so including Thomson Reuters, Goldman Sachs, the CIA, which is amazing. And currently she is an ESG strategist at the Thomson Reuters Institute, where she is a content creator on ESG trends with legal and tax accounting industries, and helps firms to create their ESG strategy. So before her current role, she ran strategy and operations teams supporting key account programs within the legal business. And before that, she ran global security in the Americas for 3 years. And then we also have Aragon, who is going to be joining us via recordings. And he is Denton's first ever global ESG officer, and he's responsible for the design, implementation, and leadership of the firm's global ESG strategy. So a lot of you are starting to kind of also take responsibility for. And so he works closely and collaboratively with Denton's global leadership team and global brand to bring together critically important efforts across the firm. So while coordinating with the firm's global ESG steering committee, responsible for developing market-leading ESG products and services for Denton's clients. And a champion for ESG, Aragon ensures stakeholder engagement and promotes key issues and considerations at all levels. So we have a really blockbuster group of experts sharing all of their amazing insights for the importance of really walking that talk and how to do that. So before we begin, we're going to take a quick poll. So I know folks are kind of still coming in, but we're still going to go forward and launch our poll. So the first thing we want to ask you is, how much business is your ESG advisory practice generating? We're going to let this go for another few seconds if you can answer the poll. So how much business is your ESG advisory practice generating? Do you have a significant increase, some increase, no change, decrease, or you don't know? Okay, so I'm going to close this poll, and let's share that. So if you can see my screen, we see that 44% say that they have seen some increase, and then a little bit more than half, 56%, say that they don't know. And now we're going to ask about what are you including in your ESG advisory practice. So we're going to talk about this in 3 sections, E, S, and then G. So what do you typically, what do you include in your ESG advisory practice typically found in the E? So carbon, biodiversity, waste and resource management, procurement, and climate. So that's nice to see. So we have 100% saying that they are including carbon in their advisory practice. No one yet for biodiversity, 40% for waste and resource management, 60% for procurement, and 80% for climate. Okay. And let's talk about the social element. So what do you include in your ESG advisory practice, typically found in the S, in social? So there's diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. There's labor and human rights, employee health and well-being, and supply chain. Okay, so now I'm going to close the poll, and let's share those results. So we see 50% of the firms do include diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging in their advice. 25% for labor and human rights, and 25% for employee health and well-being. So let's do the last poll, and this is the governance perspective. So what do you include in your ESG advisory practice, typically found in G for governance? So corporate governance, cyber governance, board diversity and governance, and compensation, right? And so now we're going to close the poll and let's share. So what do you include in your ESG advisory practice, typically found in G? So we have 75% that are advising in corporate governance, 13% for cyber governance, and 13% for board diversity and governance. Okay, but this is very telling. So it does give us a really good idea of what some of you are considering in terms of including in your ESG advisory practice. So what I want to do now, before we kind of talk about some of the insights in this, I want to share with you what our friend Aragon has said. So we're going to listen to Aragon.
The poll is interesting in that it looks at all the many different aspects of ESG advisory work that we can offer to our clients. And certainly at Dentons, these are all subject matter areas that we are able to offer guidance to our client across all of the 200 or so locations that we're present in. But I would also note that our clients' needs are increasingly complex and multi-jurisdictional, which can present interesting challenges. And we also note that we can sometimes see quite different client concerns in different regions, and so they require particular expertise. But I would also like to note that whilst we can certainly see ESG as its own vertical practice, so to speak, it would be remiss of me not to note its benefits as a horizontal or additive practice. For example, ensuring that ESG is added to corporate M&A due diligence can reap significant benefits for the client, as well as being an additive revenue stream for that practice. In this way, ESG can, and I think should, be integrated into many other practice areas.
Adrian, happy for you to go first, if you like.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be able to share some of our observations. And I think the poll, I think, asking on specifically ESG practice is almost a bit, leading to the results that we saw, that everyone would probably say some increase. If you then look at the next questions in the poll, what are you including in the E, S, and G? I think if we were to go back to the first question, after everyone saw now how broad ESG can be as a practice, you probably would say it's a not just some increase, but a substantial increase or significant increase if you include all these areas that you listed. And I think that's a bit what Aragon also alluded to, and I think that's what many law firms do. They start now with a separate, almost siloed ESG practice group, because they just need to present that they do have these kind of skills and expertise. But at the end of the day, I think, as Ergan also said, it's not a vertical, it goes across any practice group in a law firm, that people need to, or the lawyers need to understand what is ESG and how can they build this into their advice, regardless of whether it's really called ESG. In M&A, the example that Aragon gave, I think it's key to cover many of these topics that you listed under E, S, and G if you do a due diligence, because there are risks involved in this, all of these areas. So I think that's a bit the journey we also see with globally, law firms start putting out ESG practice groups. So separate this to make clear, yes, we do have the expertise. And also interesting, even though it's a hot topic, and I'm sure that many of you who are now participating, this is your day-to-day topic, and it's it's your burning platform. But overall, as a business case, it only starts to get into something relevant over time. And I think that's what I would see with this, some increase, yes, but it's not one day to the other that all of a sudden ESG is the rainmaking practice group. And I think that's a bit the journey of law firms, starting off with a specialized practice group, and then over time the aim should be that everyone in a law firm understands ESG and can build it into their legal advice, because, and we'll get to that, that's where the law firms have the impact on the client advice side at the end of the day.
So I will jump in here. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Gayatri, for inviting me to speak today. So I'm not surprised by the focus on carbon and climate as part of the E. I do think biodiversity is an emerging issue, right? And it's going to be on the horizon. The task force for nature-related financial disclosures is going to soon become part of the mainstream footprint, just like the task force for climate-related financial disclosures started a couple of years ago. On the S, I am not surprised by the majority of the focus being on diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. Nor am I surprised by the priority on human rights and employee well-being was roughly half of the focus of diversity, right? And so for me, my passion, what I love about my job is I've been a student of culture for the last 5 years. Before I focused on ESG, I was a content strategist on talent, inclusion, and culture topics for the legal industry, as well as the tax and accounting industry. So the S has been my area of expertise for a while. And what's interesting is I think I would urge you to reconsider your focus on employee well-being for a couple of reasons. Number one, we see it growing as a topic among investors. In fact, there was a recent article that I think was posted either last week or earlier this week by a competitor, which, I don't usually like to draw attention to competitors' content because that's what I do. But Bloomberg did put out an article that shared that employee well-being was a major topic on the agenda of investor proposals during the annual board season. Annual shareholder meeting season, rather. And so I think that is an indicator that is an emerging issue of growing importance. And because of that, boards of directors are focused on employee well-being because investors and shareholders are interested, but also because of the ongoing tight labor market, which we don't see abating anytime soon. There are some layoffs, but I do think that there's going to be tight labor markets for an ongoing period, because just we've reduced, in this country, in the US, we've reduced immigration by so much over the last 5 years. And so that's going to keep the labor market tight. So I see that being a larger driver. I would expect to see in 12 months from now, employee well-being almost being just as important as human rights and diversity and inclusion, because if we really want to think about it, employee well-being really can't happen without creating psychologically safe cultures, and that's a culture where people feel safe to bring up the elephant in the room without fear of retribution, right? And have a sense, and so without having psychologically safe cultures and cultures of belonging and inclusion. So those are very much interlinked in my mind, and I can elaborate on that if we have time, and if anybody's interested. In terms of the G, I think I'm not surprised by the majority of the respondents focusing on corporate governance. I think M&A due diligence is the topic that Aragon mentioned is absolutely, I'm hearing that being a increasingly important factor in due diligence. In addition, I'm also hearing antitrust, mainly because in the US, because of the letters from some of the lawmakers that had mentioned antitrust as a potential issue as part of making the case for why they would be moving to legislate making it against the law to include ESG criteria and for investments. So I think that that's another area, and I've heard anecdotally from General Counsel that is an area that they need to understand, and so I think that's an opportunity for law firms. So those are in general my responses to the proposal, and I think that points to the revenue piece, which said that it's increasing somewhat. I wanted to now comment, if I could, on some of the things that I'm hearing between Europe, UK, and the US. So I recently just finished interviewing 4 heads of sustainability, or 4 executives at law firms in the UK who are responsible for their law firms' internal ESG programs. And what I heard from them is that their ESG advisory practice, multidisciplinary ESG advisory practice, is growing and is making revenue. And presumably that's because of the corresponding increase in the UK and EU legislation that's going to come, where that reality, it's going to be a requirement, a compliance requirement to do reporting on several issues across ESG in the very near future. So I predict in 12 to 18 months that there will be that the topics that we're hearing about now, the multidisciplinary nature of the growing ESG advisory practice, we'll be talking about this as a growing, increasingly growth factor for law firms because of the multidisciplinary issues that GCs are having to deal with, and the complexity of that in multi-jurisdictions, as Aragon alluded to. So for one reason, companies, are on a voluntary basis publishing sustainability reporting, particularly around the E. But because of the macro economic environment, the uncertainty around it, and the murky political environment that is going on in the US, and I know we're going to talk about that later, I think that sustainability reporting is not going to be as touted publicly as it maybe once was 12 months ago. So it doesn't mean that just because you're not hearing about it, that companies are not doing it, right? Because it is not good for PR at the moment. Because companies don't want to get caught up from a brand reputational risk perspective in the fray. Many companies in the US, I think, will be impacted by the EU regulations and do want to standardize as much as possible. So I see a potential overflow effect there, even with the US, the EU regulations coming down the pike. And so in terms of what in terms of what constitute an ESG advisory practice, so I'm going back to the poll results here, is I've already mentioned the range of issues and added a couple of more that I'm hearing about. But I also wanted to kind of hone in on the fact that I hear from heads of sustainability that there is a lack of awareness on what constitutes ESG within employees at law firms and across law firms themselves and across the legal industry as a whole, right? So I also think that there needs to be more awareness building for what ESG is and what it means for the legal industry in terms of what are the important issues that we're hearing from stakeholders, and that necessitates the importance of the materiality assessment. So, so one thing that I just wanted to show you that I think points to this from the general counsel perspective, and Gayatri, if you will make me the presenter so that I can share my screen, please.
Yes.
Okay, you can see our beautiful faces. So I wanted to point you to this. So this is from the latest State of the Corporate Law Department in 2023 that Thomson Reuters Institute just released about 6 weeks ago. And if you see, oh shoot, what happened? Okay, sorry about that. Try that again. Okay. So if you take a look at these, so we asked them what are the current priorities, what are the current risks, and then what are the risks on the horizon. And I think all of these current priorities make sense, but I really want to point you to the column on the right hand side, risks on the horizon. And I would argue that you can that ESG is an element in most of these, right? So the frequency and complexity of regulatory changes. Well, we know that ESG is a major driver of regulatory activity at the moment across the world. So I think that's how ESG fits into the regulatory changes. Data privacy, cybersecurity, those are important G issues, right? Which showed up in the poll. So I think I would argue that cybersecurity and data privacy are important ESG issues as part of the governance. And then here you see ESG/DEI. I don't love the fact that they lump those together, because I do think ESG is way more all-encompassing than DEI. But you can see that ESG and DEI is an ongoing concern. And so these were risks on the horizon that general counsel, in-house law leaders and multinational organizations cited as what they're concerned about. So I think that this is also points to the fact that we see activity for ESG advisory to be an business opportunity now, and some of you alluded to that revenue growing, but also I think it's going to accelerate because of these risks on the horizon. Back over to you, Gayatri.
Sure, thank you so much for that. So given all of these different areas within ESG that firms could be focusing on and integrating into their business, integrating into their advisory practices, the next question really comes to how is ESG performance measured, right? So, how should a firm's ESG performance be measured, and for a way for the firm to understand, for stakeholders to understand, if they're applying those ESG standards to their own operations and business, what should firms really think about? And so I think it would be great maybe if Adrian, well, actually, you know what? Let's share some thoughts from Aragon first. But after we share what Aragon's thoughts are, I would really like for you, Adrian, to talk about some of the different frameworks that are out there, how you are seeing all of these things kind of coming into play, and sort of that, how stakeholders are absorbing information. But with the first piece, let's talk about, from Aragon's perspective, about ESG performance.
When thinking about how a firm's ESG performance should itself be measured, I do think it's worth looking particularly at what clients are requesting. So many of our clients are already coming to us with specific frameworks in mind that they would like us to report using. And so it's all very well for us as a firm to go off and to use a metric or a framework that we like, but increasingly a certain number of frameworks are being requested by our clients. And so again, I think part of our role is to balance those client demands with what we can reasonably achieve through a reporting framework, and to choose which ones we wish to use to help those clients understand what we are doing. Now, the reality is that in different regions, we sometimes see very different requests coming through for different frameworks. We also, of course, have statutory reporting frameworks coming online, like the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in Europe. So trying to balance the increasing needs from clients for clear reporting frameworks and specific requests from them for the ones they would like us to use, plus the ones that we are reasonably able to do, because some of these can take hundreds of hours to prepare, and not all firms have the capability in-house to manage such requests. Now, if you're trying to juggle 5 different frameworks, at some point you probably have to make a decision on which ones you're going to use, or which one you're going to use, and then go back to clients to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to use this one because we're submitting via this one. So the idea of which ones we should be using, I think, is an important question. They should be relevant to law firms. Many of the frameworks are not. They're not designed for professional service companies. They're designed for manufacturing companies or industrial companies. We have issues with a number of the frameworks based on the fact that their questions are simply not relevant for us, and so they're difficult to answer in order to get the sort of scoring for it, because they're not relevant for us. So juggling all of these issues, I think, is important, but hopefully there will be frameworks that are relevant for professional service firms, that will be judged as being sufficient for use by our clients, and then we can have that happy medium where we have got transparent reporting and the clients and our own people are content with what is being reported and are able to gauge our initiatives from that.
So I think, what Aragon, is pointing to it. One thing is that, a law firm, as its own business, has to think about how do they report. And I think the other issue is client. Natalie, you also referred to, this increasing regulatory pressure and environment. And I think if you look at the clients, law firms are part of the value chain, of the supply chain of your clients, and the clients, for global law firms like Dentons, they have already started to ask all these questions. And of course, they say, look, I want you to report according to GRI because that's what I do. And the next one says, I'm reporting based on the World Economic Forum standard. And so there are different requests coming from clients. And I think that will not go away. There will be more and more regulatory requirements coming from the EU. In the US, there will be some regulation coming into force, and other regions will follow with their own regulation as well, requesting clients of law firms to not only report on what they do, but also what their entire supply chain will do. So, this is something that will need a bit of flexibility. But I think what I would recommend for law firms is not to wait until we have the perfect framework, which will never be available. But I think to really think about, so what are the key issues depending on kind of your client base, but also your internal stakeholders and your culture, what is key for your law firm, and which framework would lend itself best to measure these let's say initiatives and what you would like to report on. Because topic-wise, if you look at what topics are covered by the regulation, and they're always similar. They're not the same, and I think that's the issue, that it's always a bit different, and that's why law firms like Dentons have issues in responding to different questions, because if a client asks about diversity and inclusion, they ask differently if they apply a GRI or if they apply a different standard. But the topic as such is there, and it's, you know, for a law firm to implement this and to report what they do in this issue transparently, publicly. And I think that's the other piece that law firms need to do. They need to say, look, we commit to this standard and we report accordingly. This is almost, I wouldn't say separate, but that's your own report. And of course, it would be nice if this own report satisfies every client demand or question in an RFP, but this is not going to happen. But if you have the underlying commitments, data, that you start gathering this, then you can tweak it so that you can also respond to your clients. But if you don't start you know, collecting your greenhouse gas emissions, or you know, then you will never be able to respond to a client request, regardless of what framework they apply. So I think there are many topics that you can already start doing. You can start reporting, and over time, as we see the regulation kind of evolving, you can adapt and adjust so that you can satisfy most of the client's demand. But I think you need to get started regardless of what kind of framework your clients have, and whatever you choose as a law firm, because not every framework fits your specific law firm. And I think that's the thing where you need the internal discussions. What are we going to apply? What is suitable for a law firm? Because you have global law firms, you have regional law firms, you have local law firms, and it's difficult to say this is the right standard. But at the end, if you look at the standards, you almost everywhere you have similar topics that come up. You just measure it a bit differently, but at the end, it's about making progress in these areas that are of importance, like diversity, like greenhouse gas emission or net zero commitments, and so on. So I think what shouldn't happen is that law firms hide behind regulation, or it's unclear what is you know, really expected, and we're just waiting to see what's going to happen. I think that's, you know, something you can address proactively and get started and adapt over time as we all continue this journey.
So Adrian, I would wholeheartedly agree in trying to strike the balance between keeping it simple and having the ability to report across different frameworks because of client requests. The firms that I'm talking to, you know, are focusing on simplification. And so I would say that most of all of them actually that I have spoken with, you know, have found value in the UN Global Compact and the Sustainable Development Goals for two reasons. Number one, other clients are participating in that. So a lot of companies, global companies, multinational companies have signed up to the UN Global Compact. And so it's easy for alignment there, right? The other reason that I've also heard is that it's easy to use the Sustainable Development Goals across stakeholders for law firms because they are easy to connect to emotionally. It's in plain language, and some of the other frameworks, you know, it's alphabet soup, and it may take a little bit more time to understand that. So I would say that if you were trying to get started and don't know what framework to start, the UN Global Compact is a good example, and also the World Economic Forum, Adrian, that, you know, impactvise uses. And because the important point is to use the framework that is going to be easy for you to talk to your stakeholders, because the first step in creating and updating an ESG strategy is to do a stakeholder analysis, which involves a materiality assessment. So so part of it could be that you when you're embarking on a stakeholder analysis and materiality assessment, you kind of go to a couple of clients and say, what frameworks are you using? And that might give you some good pointers too. A couple of comments on stakeholders, if I may, and this is really important because it kind of goes to, you know, how narrow or how wide you're going to analyze your stakeholders. So the widest purview that I have heard a law firm analyzing their stakeholders is talking to past, current, and future employees. So they've reached out to alumni. They made concerted efforts to do focus groups and survey their current employees, and also even summer associates. The other thing is that it's worth considering to consider some representation of regulators, right? Maybe at the state level, depending on what state you're in. Maybe if you have, you know, a big presence in the EU, including their perspective, because I do think a regulator is a stakeholder that I don't hear about consistently. So those are just a couple of thoughts that I have on measurement. And I think that the key bottom line thing is, I was like, you know, start somewhere. Doing analysis paralysis on what framework you're going to use is kind of missing. You're missing the opportunity. The key areas that you should be absolutely reporting on are doing your carbon emissions, because that's the biggest area of focus, and that's where, at least in the US, the SEC is focusing its reporting. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and then some aspects of the governance. And, you know, law firms have a special place in advising governance, because that's what law firms do, right? Whether it's on data privacy, cyber, corporate governance, et cetera, et cetera. So I would just say start somewhere, and start with, you're not going to go wrong by starting with the UN Global Compact or the World Economic Forum framework.
I mean, I would fully agree with, you know, let's get started. I think, you know, the thing is that you can wait until, you know, regulation is shaped and you get shaped as a law firm, or you shape your destiny and, you know, take proactive action. And I think, you know, we certainly see that, let's say, many law firms have started, and I think, you know, in particular in the UK, the large law firms, I mean, they have those requests probably for much longer coming in than in the US or even other regions, but this will not go away. And I think that the point is really, you know, law firms are, if you want it or not, you're part of the supply or value chain of your clients, and the clients will have the regulatory obligation to report on many of these things, and they will start asking. And if you're not ready to respond to this, I mean, you will lose out really, you know, the business opportunity. And I think that's at the end, you know, where you need to get to is, you know, to make business, of course. But I think ESG is really, I mean, the first time that clients are really interested in what you as a law firm do. This is, I mean, you know, I was a client for many years for law firms, and if we were engaged in an M&A transaction, I wanted the best M&A advice. I didn't care how, let's say, Denton's merged with any other or took over any other law firm in Africa or in Asia. I mean, I as a client don't care how a law firm does M&A, their own M&A. I'm just interested in the best legal advice. But now with ESG, of course, I'm interested in the ESG advisory side, that they need to be experts, but I'm asking questions, you know, what are you doing, you law firm? How are you governed? How are you dealing with client acceptance policies? Is this done locally or is this done globally? I mean, that compensation as well, not the amount, but the structure, because tells, what kind of culture you may have at a law firm. And all of a sudden, you get into different discussions. And if you're not prepared and haven't thought through internally, what are you standing for? What is important to you? I mean, then you will have a difficult time to have the discussions with the client. And of course, as you also said, with the employees and potential employees. And I think that's what is different now, that it's about, it's all of a sudden, it's interesting to understand how a law firm or your law firm functions. What are their values? What are you standing for? Before, I think no one really asked. They just wanted, the great legal advice, hopefully for a reasonable amount of money. But now, it's almost someone putting or shining a light on all these issues on the law firm, and you can't hide anymore.
If I may, I just wanted to make a couple of comments that I meant to say a few minutes ago, just on the client demand. So I was talking, and these are anecdotes, but I was talking to an executive from an AmLaw 25 firm yesterday, and she was saying how she views ESG and the level of demand of clients requesting information and their requests for proposals kind of at the stage where DEI was 5 years ago. That it started showing up in requests for proposals for law firms to share their information on diversity, equity, inclusion, and representation. And now we've seen that get more granular, right? Where people want to know the representation of and the demographic makeup of the attorneys who are working on their matters from the client perspective, right? And she said that she is absolutely hearing about ongoing diversity, equity, inclusion, and ESG as priorities from clients in the US, even though there's the economic uncertainty and the murky political environment. A couple of other anecdotes that I would say. I was interviewing with a UK law firm last week or 2 weeks ago, and one of the law firms shared that 20% of their client revenue have asked for total revenue have asked for ESG information. 20% in it. So that means that across all their clients, 20% of their current revenue at the firm this year is from clients who are asking about their law firm's ESG strategies. And then secondly, I know in the UK that in their formal procurement process for the UK public sector, that 3 to 5 years ago, ESG was weighted at about 5% in terms of its overall weighting. Now that can be up to 20%. So those are a couple of anecdotes that speak to this growing trend of clients' interest and specifically asking for specific information in the procurement process. And so I wanted to kind of, if you need that added justification to continue to invest, then I'm happy to point you to the resources. I will be publishing an article that very soon that does reflect the UK law firm information that I just shared.
We only have about 8 more minutes, but I want to make sure that we share Aragon's thoughts, because we asked him at Denton's how often they're actually receiving RFPs. So let's just have a quick listen to what he says.
In terms of what we are seeing as requests from clients, that is certainly increasing, and it's increasing exponentially. We have had it for a significant period of time coming from clients in Europe, but we are starting to see that broaden out substantially now. And we are getting them from all over the firm, from all of our regions. And I think many of our own professionals are surprised at the depth of the questionnaires coming through, just how much detail they're requesting from us. But certainly where we may have seen almost none in some regions, we're now starting to see them coming in once a month, once a week. In other areas where we saw them weekly, we're starting to get them on an almost every couple of days. But this isn't just RFPs. I should note that we are seeing it in a number of areas. The first, of course, is RFPs. The second are in client terms of business, where increasingly they're asking ESG clauses be put into the terms of business. We are seeing it on statements that clients are making, and they're asking us to publicly agree with those statements as well, something that we have to look at very, very broadly. So we're seeing these sort of questionnaires coming through, but of course we're also seeing supply chain questionnaires. So these are either coming from clients themselves and they have their own questionnaires, or through third-party questionnaires from the likes of CDP, EcoVadis, and so forth. So we're starting to see a substantial increase in those, as well as our clients, just as we are trying to manage our supply chain. So the questions are coming in thick and fast from all regions and across all the different areas that I've just mentioned.
Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of best practices and what you have been seeing?
So I think, I mean, as you also said, that I think it's about starting, and I think that's already a best practice, that law firms are transparent about what they measure and report and outline the journey. And I think that's probably at least from our discussions with law firm, and we have many lawyers on the call. I think the issue is, I mean, lawyers are very good in giving advice, but when it's about their own law firm, there's so many discussions how transparent you can be, and you see all the risks. But at the end, I think the best practice is really to be transparent, to start reporting, and to be clear on where you are today, and also put out some targets that you want to achieve, and you start reporting over that period of time. And I think that's the thing that we really try to discuss with law firms and help them to get started somewhere, and not wait until you have the perfect report, which is in 5 years' time, and then everything has changed anyway. And so I think that's the thing that we would certainly push on best practices. And the other thing is, on best practice, I would argue, start with your purpose. Even start before you can measure greenhouse gas emission and so on, but the discussion around your purpose, I think that's then leading to interesting internal discussion, and it guides you through your ESG journey when you really understand what are you standing for as a law firm, and that differentiates you also then to other law firms. I think what you don't want to do is do the same as everyone else does. And I think that's a bit, from the data we assess, which is now more than 1,000 law firms across the globe. If we talk and assess even the best ones, I mean, the competitors, if your competitors are doing the same, there's no competitive advantage anymore. And I think that's where you have then all of a sudden interesting discussions. If you get the data and you say, okay, you're actually equal with your peers, even though you think you're the best, but you're not standing out anymore. And I think that's where you then can adjust and really position yourselves to say, look, we are strong in this area. That's where we want to play. That's where we want to make a difference. And that's where we want to have the competitive advantage towards our peers. And I think that's at the end where you need to get to really be, in certain areas ahead of everyone else, and not just be, within everyone else in the bunch of people, and no one really sees what you're doing.
I can't agree more. I would actually say, drilling down, Adrian, on your point about purpose, is it has to be more than great client service, because that's the mission of purpose of every law firm that they stated. So I would actually say that you have the opportunity to redefine your purpose and what impact does your law firm want to have on society and our planet? Because at the end of the day, that's what your employees care about. That's what your families care about. And I think we have to get out of this kind of rigid approach to, this is my purpose from a business perspective, because if the pandemic has shown us anything, business and the human impact outside of a professional space and what goes on absolutely impacts mental health, employee engagement, and professional spaces, right? So what impact do you want to have, does your law firm want to have on the planet and society? And think about it, that you have the ability to extend your impact through your clients by determining what are the matters that you want to prioritize that are pro-environment or pro-planet or pro-society. So I would say, that's what I would underscore. The second thing that I would say is best practice is really focusing on your employees. As I mentioned before, we have a tight labor market. Talent retention is going to continue to be an issue. It's certainly of interest to clients and the boards of clients. And so this is the important about walking your talk and really making sure that if you are pursuing an aggressive multidisciplinary ESG advisory practice as a business opportunity, then you need to equally focus on progressing your law firm's internal ESG strategy. The alignment between the firm's internal strategy to the ESG advisory business opportunity is important to both your clients and your employees. And and for the first time, I'm hearing about the concern of young lawyers, particularly women of color, leaving the industry or practice of law altogether. This is something that I've heard from the accounting side for the 3 to 4 years that I've been covering it. And so this could just be a blip or an emerging trend, but I think it just points to the necessity of taking a long-term approach to focusing on the talent retention and well-being of your employees. So this is another reason to focus on the alignment between your internal ESG strategy and advisory practice.
For those who want to stick around, I know we're kind of at our hour, but I want to ask Adrian and Natalie, if you can, just a couple other questions that we have. So I'm going to pack this question with another one. So there's a lot of conversations happening about advised emissions, and we saw with the law students for climate accountability, there are conversations about legal matters, how folks are advising. Now, this question is, how do you recommend encouraging law firms to consider the matters they advise their clients on as part of their supply chain? So I'm hoping maybe you can kind of pack some thoughts based on what we're hearing about advised emissions, the legal matter work, and this particular element.
So, I mean, I would, take the position that, going back to your purpose. If you have defined your purpose, I think you can, also discuss what kind of clients do you accept and which ones are you either helping to transition or you're no longer serving or accepting new clients from that area. So I think it's, it's really defining, where do you want to play? And I mean, we take the position, it's certainly not a shaming and blaming that you couldn't, advise fossil fuel companies or so on, but you should make a statement how you help these clients to transition and to make certain choices as law firms to where you want to play and what you stand for. And then I think it's key that you are transparent around this, and that's where you have the impact. I mean, it's one thing that a law firm, can reduce greenhouse gas emission. Okay, but it's tiny compared to the advice piece. But there, I would expect law firms to be much clearer on, what matters do they accept? How do they measure this, or how do they report? What's the governance around this? And I think that's what clients will be asking for. It's not that, you just have to say, we're not going to deal with these clients anymore, but have some principles and be clear and make those choices. And then a client can say, okay, I want to work with such law firm that has these principles, or I don't want to work with this law firm. But if you're not, kind of making clear statements and have a clear understanding what your law firm is here and for which clients, I think you will have a hard time over time to really, survive at the end of the day, and that these expectations will increase towards law firms, and you can demonstrate then also your impact, your positive impact on the legal advice side.
I would just add that I think it goes back to your materiality assessment and your stakeholders, and that's the reason why you want to do a listening tour with them on a regular basis. And just as an aside, if you are looking for help on how to do a materiality assessment, that's very methodical, we have a free starter kit that if you email me, I'm happy to share with you. Natalie.runyon@tr.com. So I would say it goes back to your stakeholder analysis and what they're hearing. So if being pro climate, meaning you're going to make sure that you're not doing any business that is harming the environment, and you hear that from your clients as a value, you hear that from your employees, and you're hearing it from some elements of the partnership because they are an important stakeholder too. And you might have some partners that have a big book of business with oil and gas, for example. And so there's going to be some resistance there. So the point is that you have to make some decisions now, what you're willing to sign up for, and then how that's going to evolve. And so that's why I think the materiality assessment and checking back in is an ongoing need. So I think that's what I would say in terms of the importance of listening to the cross section of stakeholders. The other thing that I would say is that the law students climate accountability, and what they're doing, I think is going to increasingly be important. I think prospective employees, law students are going to be using that as a tool to decide which employers they want to apply to. And I think general counsel and in-house legal departments are going to be using it as a tool as a factor of where they rank. So it's just another piece of information that clients can use to assess where your law firm sits relative to other peers. And so I think it's a piece of information that could be informative of how business decisions are made or what law firms receive business. I don't hear about it using it now a lot, but I think just because the momentum of ESG, it's not going to go away, right? ESG eventually will just become where it's just business where we're analyzing through a larger lens the scope of opportunities and risks, right, from corporations' perspective. So I look forward to the day where ESG isn't viewed as just this side lens through which we're analyzing risks and opportunities, that holistic lens just becomes a part of doing business. And so the ESG term just goes away altogether. That's where I feel like we've succeeded.
So I'm going to ask this one last question, and I'm going to bundle this one again. So there's a comment that says, just to echo Natalie's comments about ESG on client RFP agenda. So this particular firm, they now have seen E, like the decarbonization goals, being a hard and fast KPI in legal services agreements, which if not met will disqualify from renewal, irrespective of legal service received. And so then on the other SG goals now being included, which may preclude us from contract renewals. So this change has been rapidly evolving in the UK and Europe in the last 18 to 24 months, but it's providing to be global in outlook. So considering this new trend that this particular firm happens to be seeing, we're talking about S&G, what is your thought tying that into sort of things that are like political responsibility, anti-ESG legislation. So how would you advise firms? I know we're talking about materiality assessments, really understand your clients, but how would you advise firms who are trying to manage this piece within the RFP, looking at more of the S and the G and anti-ESG legislation and sort of anti-woke culture?
So rounding it out with a multifaceted, difficult question. Look, it is tricky. It's like navigating landmines, right? So, and I think it comes back to what you're hearing from stakeholders and your overall firm's purpose, and the values of the firm that you want to put out from and make sure that is experienced in the culture within the organization and that of the brand, because ideally those are the same, right, in terms of reputation. And the way that, and so I'll use an example from a firm that I heard a couple of months ago, that when the Dobbs decision on abortion came down in June, this firm experienced some of their employees pressuring the firm, really asking the firm management to wanting to make a statement about the outcome of the case. And the firm was hesitant to honor that request. And instead, they said, you know what, we can't do this, but what we can do is we can extend benefits for medical travel, for any type of medical procedure that you want to have out of state, whether it has to do with reproductive health care or cancer treatment. They also brought in a constitution expert to talk about what does the Dobbs decision mean, you know, and so they tried to take some other action. So they were honest with the employees saying, we can't honor your request, but here's what we're going to do. And I think the same thing applies for your clients. They were prepared if they got any pushback from what they were doing internally with their employees, or they got any questions from the client saying, look, our clients are, our employees are absolutely critical, are our number one asset. We don't have a firm without our employees and without the knowledge, skills, and talent that they bring to work every day. So we are responding to their needs because we listen to, you know, one of our number one asset, and we consider it part of our overall purpose and values of the organization to do that listening and to make sure that we respond to their requests. And when you bring it back to your purpose and values, the client may not agree with what you're doing or even the stance that you're taking, right? But I think they can respect the fact that you heard something from one of your key stakeholders, your number one asset. Without your employees, you have no firm. And there was a need, and that was part of their overall purpose and values of the firm. So I would answer the question that way, and that it comes down to the purpose and values, and it comes down to what are the key issues from a materiality assessment and a stakeholder analysis that you are hearing consistently about, and you want to make sure that you're prioritizing those ESG issues or issues within the ESG umbrella. And so, you know, if you have lawmakers who are against ESG principles, I think it also comes back to being honest with them and saying, look, here's the business case for it. Here's the number of clients that are asking for this information, right? So we want to make money. I think we can agree on we want to make money, and we want to pay our fair share in taxes to help the communities that you serve, right? So you may not like what we're doing, but the fact is this is what our clients are asking us to do. So again, it goes back to what you're hearing from clients, what are you hearing from your key stakeholders? So it pinpoints back to the importance of that materiality and assessment.
All right, Adrian, why don't you go for it? Give us our last thoughts on that.
Okay, so I think it really, as Natalie says, I would just say it comes down to making choices and be transparent about it. I think you cannot satisfy everyone, and the time of being able to fly under the radar because you're a law firm, they're gone. You need to be transparent, or you will be made transparent. I mean, like with the law students, I mean, you can no longer hide. You need to take certain stances, and you need to make choices. That could be that you lose certain clients and gain others. But I think law firms many have not had that discussion internally. You know, what are we standing for? What's our purpose? And based on this, you can make certain decisions and choices. And you need to be transparent about this. I think that's, you know, where we certainly push, is to say, look, do it, talk about it, stick to the principles, and over time you will, you know, grow whatever business you choose. But not making a decision is just not gonna, that's not gonna be good enough at the end of the day.
Oh, I so appreciate the both of you staying on, and everyone else who has stayed on for these past 15 minutes over. The conversation has been so incredibly insightful. Natalie, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us and presenting on this topic, because it's hard, and transparency is hard, and like you said, making a stand is hard. But hopefully everyone, you kind of see the pathway in which to get there, in that it's not going to slow down, and it's actually going to, the pressure will continue to increase, and you need to really have a pathway and a thought on how you're going to proceed. I will share this recording, and Adrian and Natalie have been very kind to give us some materials that we can share with you afterwards. So, and I will share Adrian and Natalie's information with all of you afterwards. So if you want to reach out to them, you can. But thank you so much for attending, and Natalie and Adrian, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having us and for pulling this together, Gayatri. It was not an easy feat to try and get the recordings from Aragon because he's based in Japan and it's in the middle of his night. So thank you for the invitation and all your efforts in putting this together.
Of course. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.